Number 10. Avoiding effort under the label of rest. It doesn't look like weakness. It looks responsible. It looks mature. It looks like I'm taking care of myself. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. Rest used to be recovery after expansion. Now it has quietly become a shield against expansion. You haven't even started the hard thing, but you already feel like you deserve a break from it. The task sits there, the workout, the difficult conversation, the skill you said you would learn, and your mind produces fatigue before effort even begins. That isn't exhaustion. That's anticipation dressed as self-protection. Real fatigue follows output. This new fatigue precedes it. When you repeatedly label avoidance as rest, your brain learns something subtle but powerful. Effort equals threat. The moment friction appears, confusion, uncertainty, temporary incompetence, your nervous system interprets it as overload. So you retreat, you scroll, you nap, you postpone, and you call it balance. The problem isn't resting. The problem is resting from things that were supposed to make you stronger. Strength is built by pushing slightly past your comfort boundary, not by protecting that boundary at all costs. When you avoid effort often enough, your tolerance for effort shrinks. What once felt manageable now feels overwhelming. Tasks that would have taken 30 minutes start feeling like mountains. Your world doesn't get harder. You just get less practiced at handling hard. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The body adapts to inactivity faster than it adapts to training. So does the mind. If you constantly interrupt growth with premature recovery, you condition yourself for fragility. You start needing rest from things that once energized you. The discomfort of growth feels abnormal instead of necessary, and slowly, almost invisibly, your resilience erodes. Rest should refill a system that has been stretched. But when rest becomes your first instinct instead of your earned reward, you are not preserving strength. You are dissolving it. Number 9. Protecting comfort at all costs. You don't notice it happening. It feels harmless. You just start designing your life to avoid friction. You choose conversations that won't challenge you. You stay in environments where you're already competent. You filter your exposure to anything that might unsettle your worldview. Slowly, comfort stops being a place you visit. It becomes a perimeter you defend. At first, this feels like stability. You tell yourself you're minimizing stress. You say you've outgrown drama. But comfort, when overprotected, becomes a cage disguised as safety. Growth requires volatility. Every skill you've ever built came with awkwardness. Every confidence you've ever earned was preceded by incompetence. But when comfort becomes sacred, incompetence becomes intolerable. You stop starting things you can't immediately perform well in. You stop entering rooms where you're not the smartest. You stop risking looking foolish. And the brain adapts accordingly. When you constantly preserve comfort, your nervous system loses its calibration. Minor disruptions feel exaggerated. Small criticism feels personal. Ordinary uncertainty feels destabilizing, not because life got harsher, but because you stopped rehearsing resilience. There's something deeply seductive about a life engineered for ease. Predictable routines, familiar people, low-stakes decisions, but the cost is invisible at first. Your adaptability declines, your creative risk-taking shrinks, your tolerance for ambiguity collapses. Comfort isn't the enemy, dependence on it is. If you need ideal conditions to function well, you're no longer strong. You're conditional. Real psychological robustness means you can operate in imperfect environments. You can handle tension without immediately trying to eliminate it. You can sit in temporary discomfort without scrambling to restore equilibrium. But when comfort is protected at all costs, you unconsciously narrow your world. You reject opportunities that feel destabilizing. You avoid feedback that stings. You retreat from competition that might expose your limits. And in doing so, you protect something fragile. Because strength is not built by controlling your environment. It's built by remaining steady when the environment refuses to cooperate. The more desperately you guard comfort, the more intolerant you become of growth. And eventually, comfort stops feeling peaceful. It starts feeling small. Number 8. Treating challenge as threat. There was a time when challenge meant possibility. Now it often feels like danger. You see a demanding project, a difficult exam, a high-stakes opportunity, and instead of curiosity uncertainty, your body tightens, your heart rate shifts, your thoughts become defensive. Not because the challenge is catastrophic, but because somewhere along the way your mind reclassified difficulty as risk to identity. This is where mental softness quietly grows. A challenge is neutral. It is simply a demand slightly beyond your current capacity. But when your self-image becomes fragile, challenge stops being about growth and starts being about exposure. What if I fail? What if I'm not as capable as I thought? What if people see my limits? So you don't approach it like a test of skill. You approach it like a threat to worth. The nervous system doesn't distinguish well between social discomfort and physical danger. If you repeatedly avoid challenging situations, your brain strengthens the association. Hard equals unsafe. And over time, even moderate pressure triggers outsized stress responses. You procrastinate not because the task is impossible, but because your mind wants to escape perceived threat. You tell yourself you're being careful. You say you're waiting until you feel ready. But readiness rarely arrives before exposure. Confidence is built through confronting uncertainty, not eliminating it. When challenge is treated as an enemy, you shrink your range. You aim lower. You choose safer paths. You rationalize underperformance as preference. I didn't really want that anyway. But beneath that statement may be something else. Fear, disguised as choice. Here's the paradox. The more you avoid challenge to protect yourself, the more fragile you feel when challenge inevitably appears, because you never built the evidence that you can survive it. Strong minds don't interpret difficulty as personal attack. They interpret it as training stimulus. They expect discomfort. They expect temporary inadequacy. They don't confuse struggle with incapability. When every challenge feels threatening, it's not because life became hostile. It's because your tolerance for psychological risk quietly declined, and strength cannot grow in a system that interprets growth as danger. Number 8. Over-prioritizing emotional safety. You've been told your feelings are valid, and they are, but somewhere along the way, valid turned into must never be disturbed. Emotional safety used to mean freedom from abuse, chaos, and genuine harm. Now it often means freedom from discomfort, disagreement, and intensity. The bar has moved, and when emotional comfort becomes the highest priority, you begin organizing your life around never feeling unsettled. You avoid conversations that might trigger you. You distance yourself from people who challenge your perspective. You curate your environment so tightly that nothing sharp ever touches you. It feels empowering at first. You're protecting your peace. You're setting boundaries. You're choosing calm. But there's a hidden trade-off. The more you insulate yourself from emotional friction, the less capable you become of handling it. Emotions are not meant to remain perfectly regulated at all times. They are signals. They stretch and contract as you encounter complexity. When you treat every spike of discomfort as something that must be eliminated, you train your nervous system to panic at normal human experiences, conflict, criticism, uncertainty, rejection. And here's the subtle shift. Resilience isn't the absence of emotional reaction. It's the ability to stay functional while emotions move through you. If emotional safety becomes your highest value, growth starts ranking lower. Because growth is rarely emotionally tidy. It involves feedback that stings, conversations that heat up, self-realizations that shake your identity, moments where you feel exposed, inadequate, or temporarily unstable. When your system is trained to prioritize emotional equilibrium over development, you retreat from these moments instead of metabolizing them. You start interpreting discomfort as violation, disagreement as disrespect, challenge as attack. But strength is not built in environments where nothing ever disrupts you. It's built when you experience disruption and remain steady anyway. Emotional safety is important. Emotional invulnerability is impossible. And when you try to design a life where you never feel shaken, you don't become stable. You become fragile in disguise. Number 6. Escaping stress instead of mastering it. Stress used to be something you moved through. Now it's something you immediately try to eliminate. The moment pressure appears, the instinct is escape. Open another tab, check your phone, delay the decision, distract the mind. You don't sit with the tension long enough to understand it. You don't let your system adapt to it. You just remove it. And every time you do, your brain learns the same lesson. Stress is intolerable, but stress in controlled doses is not the enemy. It is stimulus. The body grows stronger through resistance. The mind grows sharper through challenge. When you lift weights, you create micro tears in muscle so it can rebuild stronger. Psychological stress works similarly. Exposure builds capacity. Avoidance shrinks it. When you constantly escape stress instead of mastering it, your baseline tolerance lowers. Tasks that once felt manageable now feel overwhelming. Deadlines feel suffocating. Responsibility feels heavy. Not because the world intensified, but because you stopped training your ability to handle intensity. Here's the deeper issue. Stress is information. It tells you where you lack skill, clarity, or preparation. If you always mute it instead of decoding it, you never upgrade the system. You just numb the signal. Short-term relief feels like control. Long-term, it becomes dependency. Your nervous system is adaptive. If it repeatedly experiences stress followed by successful coping, it recalibrates upward. If it repeatedly experiences stress followed by avoidance, it recalibrates downward. This is how fragility forms, not from trauma alone, but from repeated non-engagement with manageable pressure. Mastery doesn't mean loving stress. It means recognizing that discomfort is part of expansion. It means staying present when your heart rate rises instead of fleeing the moment. It means finishing the hard task while anxious instead of postponing it until calm magically appears. When you escape stress, you shrink your world to what feels manageable. When you master stress, your definition of manageable expands. And the difference between those two paths determines whether pressure builds you or breaks you. Number 5. Replacing resilience with soothing. You don't push through anymore. You calm down instead. Every uncomfortable emotion is immediately met with a coping tool. Breathing exercise, affirmation, distraction, reassurance. There is nothing wrong with soothing. It has its place. But when soothing becomes your primary strategy instead of endurance, something fundamental shifts. Resilience means staying in the fire long enough to adapt to the heat. Soothing means lowering the temperature. If every spike of discomfort is instantly regulated, you never expand your capacity to tolerate it. You become excellent at calming yourself, but weaker at carrying weight. Here's the subtle transformation. Instead of increasing your threshold for difficulty, you increase your dependency on comfort mechanisms. You need music to focus, silence to think, perfect mood to begin, encouragement to continue. The external world starts dictating your internal stability. Resilience, by contrast, is internal steadiness despite unstable conditions. When something hurts emotionally, the instinct now is to immediately neutralize the pain. But pain, in moderate doses, is data. It tells you where you are stretching. If you always rush to soften it, you interrupt the adaptation process. Imagine building calluses. If you stop the friction the moment it feels rough, your skin stays sensitive. The same happens psychologically. By constantly smoothing every rough edge, you preserve sensitivity instead of building durability. Soothing feels compassionate, and sometimes it is. But resilience requires allowing yourself to feel discomfort without rushing to erase it. It requires letting frustration sit without dissolving it instantly. It requires finishing tasks while imperfect, unsettled, and unsure. There's a difference between caring for yourself and cushioning yourself from growth. If your first instinct under pressure is, how do I feel better right now, instead of, how do I handle this effectively, you slowly train your mind to prioritize relief over strength. Relief is immediate, strength is cumulative, and when soothing replaces resilience, you may feel calmer in the moment, but less capable over time. Number 4. Choosing ease over growth repeatedly. It's never one dramatic decision, it's a pattern of small ones. You pick the easier option, the simpler route, the path with less friction, and each individual choice feels harmless. Why struggle if you don't have to? Why complicate life? Why push harder than necessary? But growth rarely hides in the easy option. When you consistently choose what feels smooth over what builds capacity, you condition your identity around convenience. You start valuing comfort more than capability. You begin measuring success by how little resistance you encounter instead of how much you can handle. Ease is seductive because it rewards you instantly. No awkwardness, no uncertainty, no temporary incompetence. But growth operates on delayed gratification. It demands short-term discomfort for long-term expansion. If you repeatedly choose ease, something subtle happens. Your future options narrow. Skills remain undeveloped. Confidence stays conditional. You begin avoiding arenas where difficulty is unavoidable. Promotions that require new competencies. Relationships that require vulnerability. Goals that demand discipline. You convince yourself you're being practical, but practicality without ambition slowly becomes stagnation. Here's the psychological mechanism. The brain optimizes for efficiency. If it learns that you consistently avoid extra effort, it stops preparing you for it. Motivation drops. Drive weakens. Even imagining hard work starts feeling exhausting, and then you interpret that exhaustion as proof that you're not built for it. But you were built for adaptation. You were built to expand. What you repeatedly practice becomes your baseline. If your baseline is ease, anything demanding feels abnormal. If your baseline is growth, challenge feels expected. Strength compounds, so does softness. Every time you choose the easier path, you slightly reduce your tolerance for the harder one. Over time, the gap widens. What once would have been a stretch becomes unthinkable. Ease is not evil, but when it becomes your default, growth becomes accidental instead of intentional, and nothing meaningful is built by accident. Number 3, confusing kindness with avoidance. You tell yourself you're being gentle, compassionate, understanding with your limits, and sometimes you truly are. But there's a thin line between kindness and quiet surrender, and it's easier to cross than you think. Kindness says, you're struggling, but you're capable. Avoidance says, you're struggling, so you shouldn't try. When you start excusing yourself from every uncomfortable demand in the name of self-compassion, you stop holding yourself accountable to growth. You soften the standard, you lower the bar, not because you can't reach it, but because reaching it would require friction. Real kindness supports effort, it doesn't eliminate it. There's a form of internal dialogue that sounds supportive, but slowly erodes strength. It's okay, you don't have to push. It's fine, this is too much for you. Just stay where you're comfortable. These statements feel warm. They reduce immediate pressure, but over time, they subtly redefine what you believe you can handle. If every time you approach your edge, you retreat under the banner of being kind to yourself, your edge moves inward. Your world shrinks. Your expectations adjust downward. Compassion without challenge creates stagnation. Think about how you treat someone you truly believe in. You encourage them. You support them. But you also expect effort. You don't protect them from every obstacle. You help them build the ability to overcome it. Why would your relationship with yourself be different? Avoidance feels caring because it reduces discomfort instantly. But growth-oriented kindness says, this is hard, and you're strong enough to do it anyway. It acknowledges pain without letting pain dictate action. When kindness becomes a shield against responsibility, you start training yourself to expect less from your own potential. You become patient with your stagnation instead of impatient with it, and slowly your standards dissolve. True kindness doesn't keep you small. It believes you can expand even when expansion hurts. Number 2, weakening tolerance for discomfort. It's not that life became unbearable. It's that your threshold for discomfort quietly lowered. Discomfort used to be part of the process. Now it feels like a signal to stop. The moment boredom appears, you reach for stimulation. The moment awkwardness arises, you withdraw. The moment effort feels heavy, you question whether it's worth it. You've trained yourself to respond to even mild friction with immediate correction. The human nervous system adapts to what it repeatedly experiences. If it frequently encounters discomfort and survives it, tolerance expands. If it rarely encounters discomfort because you eliminate it quickly, tolerance contracts. This is how ordinary stress starts feeling extreme. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Waiting becomes unbearable. Delayed gratification feels impossible. You need constant engagement, constant reassurance, constant smoothness to feel okay. The world hasn't grown harsher. Your exposure to manageable difficulty has decreased. Discomfort is not damage. It is tension between who you are and who you are becoming. becoming. When you repeatedly escape small discomforts, you lose practice in enduring them. And endurance is not built in theory, it's built in repetition, staying in the workout when it burns, staying in the conversation when it's tense, staying focused when your mind wants relief. Every time you choose to remain instead of retreat, your tolerance strengthens slightly. Every time you retreat instantly, it weakens slightly. The danger is subtle because it accumulates invisibly. One avoided inconvenience, one postponed task, one exited challenge. Over time, your nervous system becomes hyper-responsive to normal difficulty. You interpret standard pressure as excessive strain. Strength is not the absence of discomfort. It is the capacity to function effectively while discomfort exists. If you no longer allow yourself to feel mildly uncomfortable, you will eventually feel overwhelmed by what used to be manageable. And the smaller your tolerance becomes, the smaller your world must be to accommodate it. Number 1. Forgetting how strength is built. Strength was never mysterious. It was repetitive. It was built in the moments you didn't feel ready but acted anyway. In the times you stayed with the problem instead of escaping it. In the days you showed up before confidence arrived. But when comfort becomes central, you slowly forget this formula. You start believing strength should feel natural, effortless, aligned. If it feels heavy, you assume something is wrong. If it feels uncomfortable, you assume it's misaligned. And in that belief, you disconnect from the very mechanism that creates growth. Strength is not born from ease. It is forged through friction. Every adaptation in your body and mind follows the same rule. Stress, recovery, increase. Muscles grow because they were strained. Skills sharpen because they were practiced imperfectly. Confidence solidifies because you survived uncertainty multiple times. But when you avoid strain, skip repetition, and retreat from imperfection, you interrupt the cycle. You expect results without pressure, stability without exposure, capability without testing, and then you wonder why you feel less solid than you used to. Forgetting how strength is built leads to a dangerous illusion that comfort maintains power. It doesn't. Comfort preserves the current version of you. Only challenge upgrades it. Strength accumulates slowly and dissolves quietly. You don't notice it fading at first. You just feel slightly less decisive, slightly less driven, slightly more hesitant, until one day you face something that would have once been manageable, and it feels overwhelming. Not because you're incapable, but because you stopped training capability. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. Resilience is constructed, not granted. It demands repetition under resistance. It requires showing up when motivation fluctuates. It grows through voluntary difficulty. When you forget that strength must be practiced, you start protecting yourself from the very experiences that would reinforce it. And without friction, nothing hardens. Without resistance, nothing strengthens. Without deliberate challenge, you don't stay the same. You become softer, gradually, predictably, and silently.